Can you join us for dinner next week?
Where y'all going? Yeah, I'm basically just do really short intros.
Hello. Hi.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for coming here tonight as we hear from authors Benjamin, Gilmer, and Daniel Wallace as they discuss Benjamin's new book, The Other Dr. Gilmer. My name is Marilla, and I'm the Events and Social Media Coordinator here at Flyleaf Books. And I want to say thank you for purchasing our copy of Benjamin's book for us. It really helps us as we bring more in-person events to you. We are recording tonight's event, and it will be up in our YouTube channel within a few days. And to be mindful of our colleagues, we are asking that the authors conclude by 7 p.m. because we are closing. So now I'll briefly introduce them. Dr. Benjamin Gilmer is a family medicine physician in Fletcher, North Carolina. He's a former Albert Schweitzer Fellow and Associate Professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the UNC School of Medicine at Chapel Hill and at the Mountain Area Health Education Center. He's a former neurobiologist who turned rural family practitioner. Dr. Gilmer has lectured across the country about medical ethics, bias in medicine, and criminal justice reform. He lives with his wife and 2 children in Asheville, North Carolina. And Daniel Wallace is the author of 6 novels, including Big Fish, Rain Reverse, The Watermelon King, The Kings and Queens of Rome, and The Extraordinary Adventures. He's the J. Ross McDonald Distinguished Professor of English at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, his alma mater, where he directs the creative writing program. Thank you.
I think we know who the professional writer is.
Anybody who writes and publishes as a professional writer, we're right there together. We're doing the same exact thing, which is just really one of the reasons I'm here, and it's so exciting to be here. There's so much that we can talk about, and so much that I think that you're going to want to talk about and have questions about yourself. So I'm definitely not going to spend all of your time here, but I did want to start this out by quoting Philip Roth, who said this back in 1961. The American writer in the middle of the 20th century has his hands full in trying to understand, describe, and then make credible much of American reality. It stupefies, it sickens, it infuriates, and finally it is even a kind of embarrassment to one's own meager imagination. The actuality is continually outdoing our talents, and the culture tosses up figures almost daily that are the envy of any novelist. And that is exactly what we have here in your book. Such a pleasure to read, such a pleasure to know it's in the world, but at the same time, sickening that it's something that I could never have ever made up myself. It's incredible. Do you want to set the table for us and just let everybody know how you would like to introduce this book to us?
Sure. First, I thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for being here tonight, Daniel. There are a lot of people from different parts of my life who are here tonight. I used to babysit this one right here. She's all grown up. My first medical student, Laura Cohen, is here. She's all grown up. My cousin George, he's been grown up for a while. Aging beautifully. So this story is something that there are others here too who've experienced the story directly. Was written in the back, who was also a student. This came about, this colliding of 2 Dr. Gilmers, which is the title, is a result of a fledgling doctor, me starting my practice right after residency, discovering that my predecessor who had started this clinic, that he brutally murdered his father. Cut off his fingers and dumped the body across the border in Virginia. And so this was my entry into medicine. It was a confusing time as a young doctor who was trying to sort out himself as a person, as a father, as an educator, as a doctor. And so having this walking in these murderous footsteps was very difficult for me at first. And so it led to intrigue, it led to questioning about who this person was, and ultimately I inherited his patients and inherited their stories. So it was their stories who spoke to me. And they told me that he was a good man, and that he was a good doctor, and that he took care of the community. He was the kind of doctor that I wanted to be. So there was a lot of dissonance between like sorting out, do I want to be like this person that I had presumed was a murderer? Mm-hmm. But I was learning that his patients, our patients, wanted me to be like him because he was such a good doctor. This would include things like, rather than just giving a medication, taking people for a walk outside, people who had depression or anxiety, asking them to pick 4-leaf clovers because that was a therapeutic act that worked. So I increasingly became more intrigued by him and ultimately crossed a threshold where I either had to stay in the clinic or leave. And in order to stay, I had to discover what happened to this man.
Do you want to read a little bit from it, just so we can get a sense of the voice of the book?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is from the first chapter. The chapter is called Good Hope Road. I have bifocals. What happened next has never fully been explained. This is after Dr. Gilmer, the other Dr. Gilmer, picked up his father at Broughton Hospital, which is in Morganton, North Carolina. He picked him up that night to retrieve him and take him home where he could receive care in an assisted living facility down the street from King Creek, the clinic. Sometime that night, they stopped at an Arby's for dinner. Dalton's first meal, that's his father, his first meal out in over a year. Sometime that night, Dalton turned to Vince and began to hum the song, Baba Black Sheep. Sometime that night, Vince wrapped the dog leash around Dalton's neck. Just before midnight, Thomas Browning, coming home from a late movie in Abingdon, Virginia, an hour north of Watauga Lake, saw what he thought was a drunk man sleeping in a ditch on Good Hope Road. He and his wife pulled over and called the cops. When the police arrived, they found Dalton Gilmer's body still warm, with contusions and a bruised ring around his neck. He had soiled himself. He was missing all of his fingers. By the time the report was filed with the Washington County Sheriff Department, Dr. Vince Gilmer was already back in North Carolina, over 100 miles away. He'd driven south in the pre-dawn on the winding, 2-lane country roads and slightly straighter highways that penetrate the heart of Appalachia. He passed through the moonlit shadows of the Blue Ridge Mountains, through fog-filled hollers and sleeping mountain communities, crossing the North Carolina state line through the Cherokee National Forest. Ask Vince how he got home that night, and he probably wouldn't be able to tell you. The precise route is lost to time, lost to the shadows, lost to darkness. The night only comes back into focus again at 3:30 a.m., this time bathed in fluorescent 24-hour light. That's when a receipt from a Walmart outside of Asheville shows a $10 purchase of hydrogen peroxide, paper towels, and a pair of gloves. The day after killing his father, Dr. Vince Gilmer worked a full day, 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening, and no one, not his nurse, not his receptionist, not a single one of the 15 or so patients he saw that day noticed anything different about him. I now work in that same clinic. I know some of the previous staff. I see Dr. Vince Gilmer's patients. I use his exam rooms. I'm Dr. Benjamin Gilmer. Though we are not related, I get kind of emotional sometimes. For the last 13, it's a Gilmer thing. Though we are not related, for the last 13 years, I've lived in the other Dr. Gilmer's shadow. I know his story better than anyone except for Vince himself. It's a complex, twisting, and often frightening tale. To many people, it doesn't make sense. Skipping around a little bit. Why? Why did he run? Why did he cut off the fingers, his father's fingers? And what did he do with them? Why did a caring doctor become a brutal murderer? A few weeks after Vince killed his father, mine officiated at my wedding. On top of a North Carolina, I usually add words as I go, on a North Carolina mountaintop on a short drive from Watauga Lake where the murder occurred. I was looking forward to starting a family in my professional life as Dr. Gilmer. Back then, I had no idea there was another Dr. Gilmer. I had no idea what the other Dr. Gilmer had done. And I had no idea that it would change both of our lives forever.
It's remarkable because this, to put it in time, that he killed his dad in 2004. That's right.
That's right.
And then you arrived in 2009 to the other Dr. Gilmer. This book, this whole story is full of these, you could say, coincidences that are eerie when you look at them closely. I mean, the very title of the book, The Other Dr. Gilmer. The research I did coming here, I was telling Dale that Gilmer is not that common a name. It's, according to my sources on Wikipedia, it's 1 out of every 700,000 people have that name. And then you take the subset of that of doctors who are Dr. Gilmer, probably less than 700. Unless there's 700,000 Dr. Gilmers, then that would be crazy. But just the fact that you have the same name, to me, is, on the one hand, you're thinking, oh, that's curious and interesting. But if you hadn't have had the same name, I even wonder where this story would have gone. Would there have been as deep a connection with you in his life and in this story if you'd been Dr. Wallace, for instance? That's me, Dr. Wallace. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think about that? Do you think that there would be any difference if you had a different name?
I hope there would not have been any difference.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people ask, like, why would you do that? Why would you feel connected to this man you don't know? I mean, part of it is that all of us as family medicine physicians here, this is what we do. Like, we connect ourselves. Mm-hmm. All of us who have right brains, we've been talking about right-sided brains today, feel connections like that. For me, I didn't see it as a coincidence. Like, it felt more real than that. It felt more of a sort of a destiny calling.
Yeah.
And it was so odd that I couldn't resist, like, feeling the experience as a destiny calling.
What do you mean? Say destiny calling. What does that mean?
That our paths collided for a reason.
Okay. And has that happened to you before in your life? Have there been any other destiny callings, or is this the first one?
Well, this is certainly the first one like this.
It would be very curious if there are other similar.
But I read The Alchemist when I was a young boy. Like, I appreciate the universe sending us signs and remarking that we should follow them sometimes. But this felt like that. It felt like more than a coincidence. Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest part for me though was that we were connected more by name. We were connected more by a building. We were connected by our patients. And so it wasn't a brief experience. It was like an experience that unfolded over a long period, over years. And when you see someone believe in their doctor, even though he had done this terrible act, they still believed in him. So I was inspired by their intentional belief.
Right. That must have been it. If they had talked to you about what an awful person he was and how they're not surprised that he had done all this, then your curiosity level would have diminished considerably.
I think so.
Yeah. But that raised red flags for you, that why this wonderful doctor, this wonderful person, very interesting, loving man, could then who has no record of ever doing anything like this, suddenly snap and kill his dad.
It didn't make sense, and there were little clues. Like we're all sort of sleuths in medicine by nature, and there were little. I was starting to see this collage of images about this guy through these stories, and recognizing that there were some things that didn't make sense. Like he had precipitously divorced his wife. I learned had a traumatic accident, and it was a trauma patient, and had a presumably traumatic brain injury. That was 6 months before the murder happened, and we all come to life with preconceptions. We're either born with them or we develop them from a very early age. My preconception was that he had a traumatic brain injury because I was a neuroscientist. I had spent a decade studying the brain cells dying as a sequelae of trauma, and so it was close to me that assumption that this obviously he had a traumatic brain injury, and this is what caused his brain to start unraveling. One of the characters in the book is the brain itself, and I tried to start creating an image about the brain, trying to personalize it in a way, because the brain can be damaged in so many ways. Some that seem very traumatic, some that seem very minor, but all of this cumulative trauma can affect us very deeply. So it's a story about events. It's a story about the brain. It's a story about all of our brains that can become fallible.
Yeah.
But each time I learned a little clue, it was just another thing that pushed forward.
Yeah, it's a detective story. That's one of the great things about it. It's so many different stories in one, which we'll get to. But from the get-go, it is a detective story. You're presented with a mystery, and you are, you're Sherlock Holmes in this case. You're or some, Appalachian Dr. Holmes. I don't know, but that's how detective stories begin, with a mystery and somebody wanting to figure out what happened. And so that's what this book is, and then it moves through one mystery into another mystery, into another, and there's this slow unraveling of one story leading to the next. So, and that's what keeps you reading. You started there in 2009. You started meeting. Of course, you heard about Dr. Gilmer. You met the patients, and then a relative of yours mentioned your situation to a reporter at This American Life, right?
That's right.
So that person's not here. It's not this one, is it? It's okay. Not this one.
It's the other cousin Gilmer.
It's the other cousin. That's your book. Yeah.
Says the other Sherlock Holmes.
So again, and you talk about destiny. This changes things when This American Life gets involved. How did that change things for you when that call came in that they were interested in talking to you about the story?
Well, it didn't change anything at first because I told her no. I told her I didn't want to be even close to This American Life because in that moment I was paranoid. I was literally scared about because I had just had this experience with a patient who told me that the other Dr. Gilmer was getting out and that of course if he got out he would come for me. I would be the obvious target because I had stolen his life. I had assumed his life in the clinic. I had assumed his riches. I took over his life, and I was the same age at that point as he was if he had continued the trajectory. And so I politely told Sarah, no, thank you. And then there was an interval time that I realized I needed, if I was going to get to the bottom of this, I had to get some help. I needed a journalist to help push me, to help me do some inquiry. I also wanted to learn from her too. I was curious about the process, the journalistic process, and told her that we could do this together if she took me, considered me a student of the process. We did it together. So in family medicine, we like to work as teams. Like we're very team centered. And so this was an opportunity for me to bring someone else in to be a part of the pursuit. Someone who knew what they were doing. Yeah.
So you were also interested and curious in the process of reporting and thought it would be interesting to be a part of something like that and see what it was like.
More importantly, though, I needed her help.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. She came on the case in 2011, and how long was it after that the episode aired on This American Life?
So we started together in 2012.
2012?
So we spent 6 months together. First, it was going to be a little tiny story on coincidences, a 15-minute segment. And then we kept uncovering new details and eventually went to the prison to visit him. And kept telling Ira Glass, we need another week. And finally, it morphed into something that she later, at the very end of it, said, oh, this could be like a serial or something. And the serial podcast actually was a result of this work, because we worked with a lawyer in Virginia who, during our discovery, told her, oh, you should take a look at this other case. And here was launched, like serial during that time too. But Sarah was instrumental in helping me to learn and to be a commander of sorts to help push me towards the discovery.
Yeah, and do you feel like, again, it's so hard for me to say if this hadn't happened, would this have happened? But at some point, these stories they stop. You think, well, how interesting was it that I had the same name of this guy who was a murderer, and now I'm moving on with my life, and that's that, and it is just a coincidence. But these things continually happen that kept the story alive and kept your active interest in it alive.
And the interest in the clinic is still alive. Like the stories are still alive. His presence is still alive in that building. And for the students who've been there, like we still walk on the carpet that he laid down. Like it's every week I see one of his patients, and they of course have wanted to know what's happened to him, so that this collage has become more complex over now a decade. And can have been inspiring too. Like one 85-year-old patient who's been just a social justice fighter, who has written letters to the governor, who's written him hundreds and hundreds of times, who realizes the atrocity of the carceral system that we now have in America. Like those kinds of people have continued to just rebirth the story in front of us.
It's awesome. The story begins in what you think is the darkest place, patricide, and it's really ghastly. But then the story takes us into equally dark corners of the culture, of American culture. The incarceration, the prison system, abuse, and mental illness. And these are three of the shadows that are the devilish shadows that our culture casts, and they're all in this book and in this story, which is heartbreaking. Talk a little bit about where he stands and how relevant he is to all of these issues.
Well, firstly, I just want to recognize that I didn't know anything about this dark shadow of our culture, this stain of our incarceral system. I mean, I had undergone an undergraduate degree medical school, 2 fellowships, 2 master's degree, and a residency, and I did not know about the darkness of our system. Not until I went there, which is intentional. Prisons are not, they're not usually roadside. We're not intended to see them, that we're blinded to them. And, as a privileged white guy, I never had the opportunity to see that. So it was, I wrote this story as a memoir because it's a very personal journey about the discovery of Dr. Gilmer, but the discovery of myself in this darkness. It became very clear to me, like after meeting him for the first time, how dark it was. It was the first time I ever had, I consider myself a pretty resilient guy, but I had a panic attack that first day, and not being dramatic, in the prison. I couldn't sign my name when I walked in. It was completely unexpected. But being a part of the darkness and experiencing it for 10 years, seeing it consistently, seeing the torture, he's a man with mental illness behind bars. Watching that de-evolution is just painful. Similar to what one of the defense lawyers in his trial, what is the most insane thing you could do when you're going to trial for murder, your own murder? What's the most insane thing you could do? Fire all of your lawyers and not ask for an expert witness. That's what he did. And his fired defense lawyer described it as watching the whole process, watching someone commit suicide with a butter knife. So it's been an experience in itself, just to be a part of the darkness, to see how mental illness worsens when you're in prison. When you go to prison, you have a 40% chance of being severely mentally ill. That equals 800,000 people. 800,000 severely mentally ill people who live behind bars. That means 10 times more mentally ill people live in prison than in mental hospitals. I didn't know any of that. But when you learn about the darkness, is that for any of us who took the Hippocratic Oath, you can't step away from it.
Right. And you not only don't step away from it, you are stepping into it. Talk about some of these epiphanies that you've had based on your experience with the other doctor and in prisons and in the work that you've done in understanding it all. How that's changed your practice as a doctor and your goals as a doctor.
One epiphany. Today was a day of speaking of leadership and advocacy with our students. So one epiphany is that there are many ways to be an advocate. You can advocate for one person. You can advocate for 10 people. You can advocate for 800,000 people. So after the radio story came out, we had 15 million listeners. I never imagined something like that would happen. And started hearing other people's stories about how it affected them. And that triggered something deeper, that this could be a story that could catalyze the way we see this problem, the way we understand mental illness. I think most people who deal with the mentally ill, which is every primary care provider, it's 20% of what we do. And we all know that it's another shadow to people. People don't understand it. They don't want to be proximate to it. And so that which was why I was intentional about bringing the brain into the book as a character, so you could begin to realize that we're all so close to it. We're all very close to this cognitive fallibility that could make us mentally ill also. And that you have to understand that to get to the next step, which is a recognition that this is wrong. We can't put people in prison with mental illness. We can do better than that. So, everybody thinks about how they can get involved with advocacy, and I had no clue about it. This was like the very beginning of trying to learn about a path towards advocacy. And through the process, I've learned a lot about how you can message, how you can use media in your favor, how you can interconnect other people. And that's really important.
Yeah. And specifically, healing crime, which to me sounds like the most awesome epiphany of what you've taken from this, and then what the food that this experience is given you. When you came up with that idea, or did that feel in a way like a thunderbolt, that this is what, when you talk about destiny, is that what you really mean? Is that it was partially at least leading to this idea that you had, what you call healing crime?
I mean, Vince gave me that idea. I don't know how much destiny came into that, but it felt like it felt like a thunderclap. Like it was something that felt like sort of a pie in the sky notion that was sort of whimsical at first glance, but how do you heal crime? I mean, there are a lot of people working on this effort. Like there are people like Brian Stevenson and EJI. I mean, people like Barry Scheck and the Innocence Project. Every corner of every state, there are people working on this problem. But the trying to perceive this problem macroscopically first, trying to recognize that physicians, all allied health providers, we have a certain responsibility to call it out. Recognizing that the law enforcement agencies, no, they can't handle this themselves. The legislature can't handle this themselves. The mental health providers can't handle this themselves. And so, it's an attempt to reframe the problem, which is much larger than, a prescriptive approach. It's going to take a cultural shift. It's going to take a punctuated evolutionary step. And I think using big ideas like that can help people to shift in ways that allow us to become more prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The title of the book is interesting also to me. The other, Dr. Gilmer, because now it feels like that your life has changed so much through the course of your experience with the other Dr. Gilmer, that you have in fact become another Dr. Gilmer, right? You are a third Dr. Gilmer. You're not the Dr. Gilmer that you started out being, right? And you're a public person. You're a writer. Your life is, I'm assuming, has changed a little bit in ways that are surprising to you.
Yeah. There's a reason he's written 6 books. Big brain over here. Yeah, I mean, that's been one really exciting thing is sort of the stepping into a void, not knowing what the endpoint might be, but just trying to maintain curiosity. Curiosity, which leads to inquiry, which leads to transformation, which leads to vision, which leads to change. Yeah, I still don't know what the third Dr. Gilmer is going to look like, but this has been the biggest class of my life.
Yeah. What's it like being a writer?
So it's been really fun.
Yeah.
It's been really fun. So I got a C- on my final paper in freshman English at Davidson. And from Dr. David Long, thank you. And we, as recognizing eventually that I'm a very right-brained person, but denying it for years, for decades even, because medicine sort of beats that out of you a little bit. When I embarked on the process of writing, I had no idea what I was doing. I sat in a closet for 2 years and wrote from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. for 2 years trying to practice, and it was, as you know, it's hard work. And then
I did that, by the way, with being a doctor. I really in a closet for 2 hours. It didn't work out as well for me as it.
So you're a big A author. I'm a little A author, and what I learned that it was like the most therapeutic experience I've ever had. Both in terms of like just getting to discover myself, like taking time away from medicine to be reflective. And also getting help. I have an amazing agent. My agent represents like the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu and Jane Goodall and Stephen Hawking. And you know, those kind of people like are really, really helpful. Like I had a professional coaching every week. And so it was like a master class in writing.
From Desmond Tutu?
Not
Okay. Just to be clear for everybody, Desmond Tutu did not write this book.
But my agency, like they provided this amazing support, which enabled me to go from this like difficult period of writing to like really enjoying the process.
That's great.
And I can't wait to do it again.
Oh, that's a good question. Are you going to do it again?
Well, I'll never be able to have I'll never. This is a once in a lifetime story. Like you can't make it up. It's a story that invited me to be a part of it. You know, I wrote it not because I'm a writer, but because I wrote it for the story. So I hope that there will be another story that comes that collides with my path. I would love for that to happen, but I don't know.
Yeah. You'll be open to it if it does.
Yeah.
Well, I want to open the floor up now. I know that everybody has questions that they would like to ask. Sorry, not in the front row. Front row. Too thirsty. Okay, this one.
So, Dr. Gilmer, the thing that really inspires me is a lot's been written about criminal justice reform. We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's incarcerated individuals. And then we closed the psychiatric hospitals, and now these folks are either on the street homeless or they're in prison. And I think about the power of one individual. You have 15 million people listen to that. And it's stories like this where the shared humanity really resonates with you. We can sit and read stuff, but when, especially on like just sitting here listening to this, and Dan was such a good interviewer, I'm so inspired, and I think we don't really know how the impact will play out on this, but I suspect, and like you said, we can't rely on legislators, healthcare systems. We're all in this together, but it's these kind of things that pull people together from all walks of life to be change agents. And I salute you for this. You didn't do this for that, but what you learned by going to prison, and like you said, people just don't go to prison and see prisoners. Until one sees it, it's like, oh my God, why are these people in prison? And of course...
and why are doctors not saying anything about it?
Right. Well, you just did, so salute that. Thank you.
Yeah, the power of one. Like I saw this as a power of one experience entirely. And now I've realized like this can be a great tool. You know, I realized that I could tell Gawande, Maddie's father, saw the potential, benefit to a story like this as an example of, how this could be used and how it is currently being used. I've been communicating with parts of the very conservative legislature of North Carolina who have invited this book to be part of their mental health caucus book club. So that's 60 legislatures and the governor and hopefully your boss who's also going to come, and we're going to read the book together, and I'm going to challenge them to come up with like 10 low-hanging fruit opportunities to change the system. So I shared that with the head of the Innocence Project in Virginia yesterday and said, hey, this is what we're going to do in North Carolina. What do you think about getting your legislatures together? And she said, yes, let's do it. And then I thought, why don't we get every state's legislatures together? Because the other thing I've learned is that you can intellectualize all day to people, and they will hear nothing. It depends, and you have to know, like, are they left brain or are they right brain? This speaks to left brain and right brain people because it's a story. And my intention was that, it makes everybody cry in the end.
That's what you want.
But that's a great question, Doug.
Can I? I noticed you refer to Vince's father as Dalton and as his father. And I wondered if that was what was going on in your head when you choose to call him Dalton and when you choose to call him his father.
Oh wow, that's a big other question. So it's a really good question actually. I've never thought about that question. So the question is why did I sometimes refer to Dalton as Dalton, and why do I sometimes refer to him as Vince's father? But at first he was just a name and a dead body, and that was all I knew about him. But the part of the discovery of the story is realizing the immense intergenerational sexual trauma and physical trauma that had been happening for generations in this family. Not because of Huntington's. And I have to say that Huntington's disease, with a spoiler alert, which is what Vince has, is not a killer disease. It's not what made Vince kill his father. It was one element that contributed to the destabilization of his brain. There were 5 other things that contributed to the destabilization of his brain. It was the perfect worst storm that could have happened to him. And so, but as I got to know Dalton, I thought of him initially as a victim, but I didn't think, there was no humanization with him. But after I've learned all about his family history, I know all of Vince's family. And I've learned so many things about Dalton. So now he is a father. Despite the horrific abuse that he delivered, he suffered too from an incredibly fallible brain.
I appreciate this storytelling. I'm from a Huntington's disease family, and growing up, the community around us constantly called the police on my mom. And while she was never arrested, like as a child in elementary school, seeing that over and over, and the community not just asking what's wrong, but calling CPS, calling the law enforcement system on us, like really spoke to me to a breakdown of community. And now I actually have tied that into my work. I work at a therapeutic farm program for formerly incarcerated women called Benevolence Farm.
Beautiful.
And like you were saying, many of the women there are experiencing intersections of trauma and mental illness. But one of the challenges we have is, even if we want to get them connected to support, and we see kind of some of the manifestations, like they don't want to see doctors because the last time they saw a doctor, it ended with them going to prison. And that they saw the medical system as the entryway to prison. So we actually have a really hard time with traditional medicine with a lot of our folks, because last time I went to the psychiatric unit, I didn't leave, and then I ended up in North Carolina State Prison. So I'd be curious too, when you're talking to other doctors, whether it's family medicine or psychiatry, how can you continue to share the effects of? I think you're pretty good at humanizing the people you're seeing, but we don't always. I think the doctors we work with sometimes disconnect the down the line the consequences of incarceration as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. I applaud your work. So I tried very intentionally to drop a lot of pearls for students, for residents, for doctors, all doctors, for that very humanizing reason, and to incorporate a greater sensitivity by. I think it's hard for people to look at themselves and to look at mental illness, even though we treat so much of it. It's hard to take that next step, to be proximate to it. So I hope that goal was achieved in this book. That it was very intentional to humanize mental illness and to encourage, inspire people to come closer to it, and to recognize the link between incarceration and mental illness, and that prisons just can't treat mental illness. They can't treat Huntington's either. Can you imagine living with Huntington's for 20 years? I mean, it's and surviving it, like that's incredible. I mean, Vince Gilmer's story is a story of survival, too. One who's marched through life with this incredibly vulnerable brain, and who remains, committed to survival. Like it's an incredible testament to the resiliency of our brains. Yeah, but I really hope that comes through. Hattie?
Talk a little bit about policy, because you've mentioned that advocacy could mean affecting one person or advocating for many, and in reality, by advocating for one, you've now been given a tool to affect a lot of people. So talk a little bit about how you're going to wield it. And you mentioned that you're going to get the mental health caucus to read your book, but beyond that, how you've already gotten them to, but how you're going to nudge them.
So this is the policy bureau back here, the North Carolina policy bureau. So I don't know entirely. Like, I'm learning as this process unfolds, but we had an amazing conversation at the UVA Law School yesterday about this problem, about this disconnect that happens between policymakers, between legislatures, between medical institutions, between all of us. Like we live in these silos. And policy changing, I see the will of our legislature to want to read this is a huge step. But I see my role as like being interconnected. So I want to interconnect like the people, the generation like yours, people who are going into the law enforcement agency as a career. Like I want to interconnect all these people. And so I see, I am not a policy maker, but I want to inspire policy to happen. But it takes, just for small little policy issues to happen, like in Virginia, for example, for the capital punishment to be abolished last year in the state of Virginia. That took a decade of work. It took a decade of changing minds. It also took a governor who was finally a neurologist to do that. But I want to learn from you guys about how we can do that, because it's going to take all of us.
Hey, how is Vince doing now?
Whew. So he is struggling right now. I don't want to spoil the end of the book too much, but he's still in prison today. And I will say that, this is a spoiler alert, but I know many of you have listened to the story already and have read the book. He is a free man. Get this, he is a free man who's officially exonerated by the state of Virginia, by the governor, who currently lives in prison to this day, because we are struggling to find him in a clinical setting. So what does that tell you? It tells me many things, because there's a mental hospital that shares the parking lot with this prison. And there's no will within the Department of Corrections, within their behavioral health network, to walk him across the street. So that's one problem. There's still punishment that's being exerted. He was in solitary confinement last week. So despite the fact that he's a free man, they're still punishing him, which is another grandiose problem, right? That we are addicted to punishment as a culture. So that's one problem. The other problem is, why should it be so hard in North Carolina to find a space for him at either Broughton Hospital or Butner or Cherry Hospital? That it has to be one of those three places. We have to land him there first before we can evaluate him, stabilize him, look at him forensically, so that to give him a stamp of approval so he can go to an assisted living facility like Black Mountain, where they take care of Huntington's patients. And it's going to take the secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, and it may take the governor to leverage power to get him into one of these places. It's insanity.
Do you have any insights into why so many other human beings who have power over others are interested in punishment rather than giving somebody a hand up or compassion?
Because it's our nature.
Is it everybody's nature, or is it a certain type of human characteristic that comes out in a certain percentage of humans?
It's the same reason we experience racism. But it's also about politics. I mean, there's a reason why Terry McAuliffe, and I'm going to say it loudly, but Terry McAuliffe in 2018 rejected our clemency petition because he was considering running for the presidency. There's no question about that. I don't know why Governor Ralph Northam rejected our clemency petition in 2021, but he did. And, you know, that's why I had to write a book. That's why there's a movie that's being produced about this right now that we're working tirelessly to do. It was a race against the governor's last day in office, and miraculously he freed him in his last hours in office. Yeah. Yeah, this runs deep. Like, this is. I think we have time, maybe 2 more questions. John, how did you do?
Benjamin, I think it's worthy to know the power of the process that happened to you in terms of you feeling connected to his patients in the process of how between a caretaker and a patient that goes on, which would be transference, how they transfer Vince onto you. And because of that transference, as you feeling better, and you have the countertransference that happens where you want to be more like him and want to treat them and make them better. And it's a powerful dynamic that bonds you all together and started right away. And it has to do with the healing process too that's going on for all of you, for you, for his patients, because that's the therapeutic process.
Yeah. That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So that explains why I started seeing him as, you know, very soon as a victim, as a patient.
I have 2 questions. One is silly, and is who would you foresee playing yourself in the film?
No.
And then my second question is, and it's going to have like probably a paragraph before I actually get to the question part. But in like the triangle, we have like Dr. Evan Ashton, who's one of our family medicine docs, who has these fit clinics for formerly incarcerated folks that kind of builds like a safety net for when people are released and allowing for them to kind of establish in the community and have a little bit of a stronger footing in integrative healthcare. I was wondering if there are any similar kind of clinics or infrastructures where you are in the western part of the state that can help formerly incarcerated folks like reestablish trust with the healthcare providers, but also reintegrate into society in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I wish I'd added Evan Ashkin to that list of Brian Stevenson because he does the same work. So in every community there are many attempts, and we have this in Nashville too. We have, you know, recidivism reduction, transition clinics. In our group at Mayhec, we tried to create, well, we did create through funding from the state, a transitional hotel during COVID so that we could get people out and transition them back to the community in a safe way. So there are amazing programs like that are happening. So many people doing good work. But there aren't many Evan Ashkins in this whole state. Like, there's really one. I mean, he would be the most formidable clinical voice that I know of that's doing like the work. Like, he's doing the work.
But back to the more important question. I think I know who could play him. and it's the actor who's in Better Call Saul.
Oh. They look like.
Don't they look alike? Bob Odenkirk? You know him?
No, I don't know him.
Oh, yeah. He could be your double.
So there was I saw a blog once that this random guy back in 2015 had this long conversation about like what a movie would look like, and he thought that Danny Glover would be.
It's a stretch, but maybe.
That's good.
Well, Daniel Wallace is a writer, became an actor. You're a doctor that became a writer, so I think there's hope.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out on a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to join us for dinner, are they next door or somewhere? Please come join. Yeah. I didn't have a chance to read my Laura Cohn. So can I just read?
Yeah,
can I,
yeah.
30 seconds? Can I have 30 seconds? Okay. 30 seconds. So Laura.
Page 27.
What, page 27?
Yeah.
Page 27?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Seriously, I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Wait, there was another Laura quote. Oh, okay, I'll just read this little paragraph. So Laura Cohn was my first student at King Creek. I realized right away that she was going to be a huge asset to me. Wicked smart, unflappable, always professional, and ready to learn. That was a good thing because all of us at King Creek were learning how to navigate a medical landscape that was changing radically. Soon after taking office, President Obama had signaled that healthcare would become his #1 legislative priority, setting off months of contentious debate. His proposed Affordable Care Act would allow tens of thousands of people to get medical insurance for the first time, a major victory for public health. But before it became the law of the land, we were in a different world. Laura grappled with the fact that medical care was different for each patient, depending on their insurance status or lack thereof. Our treatment was the same for everyone, but each patient's access to services or medications was distinctly based on their socioeconomic status, whether or not they had insurance. We worked in a system that was inherently designed to serve the most fortunate rather than the most vulnerable. The other Laura Cohn paragraph describes her ability to crack the code. I pitched the idea, or I ran this patient, made it up, to a neurologist to see and enacted what Vince Gilmer looked like when I saw him in prison. It took him over 30 minutes to get to a diagnosis. It took Laura 5.